Welcome to Prose from the Underground, coming to you from my basement in northern Michigan, where I read, write, think, and say things, and quite often I get to talk to someone. Today it's a hardcore version of Prose from the Underground, as I got to speak with the mighty Dirk Manning, a widely held comic book writer who specializes in horror. I first met Dirk many years ago, before he was hailed as he is today. We were both working and living in Toledo, Ohio, a bare-knuckled city. And I believe we were standing around in a club over the roar under strobe lights. We found ourselves in a corner yelling at one another about an artist that we liked. We became fast friends, and now, decades later, I can say, he has had a major impact on comic book culture. Today he'll say many things, two of which I think are worth noting no matter what genre you have committed to. And the first is a commitment to genre itself. As you'll see, Dirk Manning has thrown his arms and horns and tentacles around horror. He'll talk about what it does, what it affords, what it allows, what it requires of its adherents. Secondly, he'll say some interesting things about collaboration. What, say, literary fiction writers or many poets don't necessarily have to think as a function of delivering the artistic vision itself. Comic book writers often rely entirely on illustrators to bring their stories to fruition. That's worth noting. Manning has also had a major impact on circulation and distribution in the industry. He'll talk about that, and maybe he'll come back and talk about it even more in the future. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Here we go. So here we are with mighty Dirk Manning, comic book writer, widely acclaimed. I want to start right out and ask you about a craft question that can also be thought of as a genre question. So you're putting together a story.
Yes.
What is, if you could, and this is maybe unfair, but what's the most pressing element when you're putting together a story? Is it something about tension, or is it about pace or character point of view? What is most pressing or most critical in that process?
I know it's a great question. I could talk process all day. But in this particular question, to me, it sounds so pretentious, and I apologize, as a writer. No, but as a writer, the most important thing every time I put my hands on the keyboard for my fiction work, for my graphic novels, is theme. Theme over everything. To me, it's all about it. What does this story say? I did a book about writing for comics called Right or Wrong, The Writer's Guide to Creating Comics. And one of the earliest chapters in the book is called Plot, Plot, Thud. Everybody's got plots, right? Everybody talk to is an idea for a story. And I'm not demeaning that. I'm not playing that down. But I think one of the reasons I've had any modicum of success that I've had, and conversely, whether it be in music or movies or art or whatever, the things that draw me into the theme, what is this saying? And that's specifically why I'm so drawn to horror. Because to me, every good horror story answers one question. What would you do if? Right? To me, that speaks to the human condition. To me, that speaks to character. That speaks to morals. That speaks to society. That speaks to philosophy. That speaks to religion. That speaks to everything. So whenever I put my hands on the keyboard, and when I'm to the point I'm writing a story, or even before that, honestly, when I'm developing the story in my mind, whether it be the short stories of Nightmare World, whether it be this big, long horror noir epic of Tales of Mystery, or even like a book I do like Twisted Haunted Highons, which is more of a kind of a goofy ghost hunting stoner comedy, it's still about theme. And that is the most important thing to me, is theme by a mile, theme all day. And I won't even write anything unless I not only know what that theme is, but I'm willing to get really raw and vulnerable with that.
Just a slight follow-up. Does horror then intensify the possibilities? Does it make the what would you do if more palpable?
It can, when you look at a series they did like Nightmare World, right, which is 52 8-page stories in the whole series. Every story is a different subgenre of horror. In horror, you can do romance, you can do comedy, you can do, suspense, you can do anything under the umbrella of horror. I love horror. And a lot of times people think of horror as blood and boobs or violence or, violence specifically against women, especially. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you the straight face that there is not aspects of this genre that focuses on that. What I'm also going to tell you is I think in the public mindset, that very small fragment of the genre historically, or for a long time at least, has been overly emphasized to the detriment of the genre. Twilight Zone is horror.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of stuff that Ray Bradbury wrote, although it was definitely science fiction or speculative fiction, I'd argue is horror. How many people will tell you some of the favorite stuff they've read is Edgar Allan Poe?
Yeah.
He was the master of horror. Yeah. Or Stephen King, and now his son, Joe Hill. These are, there's so much you can do. And specifically your question, I do think that when you take reality or you take the bounds of what's normal and you just twist it a little bit, just give it a little turn the die a little bit. It can intensify things dramatically and exponentially.
Are there any other writers that are always pressing into your consciousness as you write?
Oh yeah, and uh, obviously you talk about your Edgar Allan Poe's and your Ray Bradbury's. The approach to horror of H.P. Lovecraft is a huge influence on almost anybody that writes horror. And we cannot trivialize, despite maybe some unsavory elements of his personal life, his contribution to how the medium, the genre of horror has been approached, not the medium. Harlan Ellison is a huge one. Huge. I had the honor of meeting Harlan Ellison a couple of times. Okay. Great guy, powerful, great in the sense that, I know he has just tested the word awesome, but his impact and his mountain of work was awesome, was awe-inspiring. One that, outside of the comic circle, a lot of people are surprised when I name drop is William Shakespeare.
Why not?
Shakespeare was huge for me. His attention to the craft and the drama, no pun intended, the drama that he created, and even a lot of those fantasy and horror elements that he brought into his work with ghosts and things like that. Fairies are scary. I mean, you look at something like Midsummer's Night Dream. That is not. I mean, it's played for laughs sometimes, but it's not funny. In Nightmare World, I did a fairy story. Talk about how scary they are. And in Tales of Mystery, I brought back the Fae folk a little bit. Those are big ones. In the world of comics, Alan Moore, there's Alan Moore as a comic book writer, then there's everybody else. He's great. Eric Powell is an amazing writer, cartoonist. He's a writer and illustrator. I do not draw. I was like a really good artist in first grade. I just never got any better. He's a guy.
Let me just ask, because I wanted to ask this if we had time, and since you brought this up, you're in a really fascinating relationship with your illustrators. So you bring illustrators in, you work with them persistently. Yes. How does that go? You write the stories, illustrators come forward, and they become really inextricable to the way the art functions. How does that work?
Absolutely. And again, go back to what I said a moment ago, a guy like Eric Powell, who's a writer and an artist, he can create a singular vision and do it himself. But even he will work with other artists sometimes, whether it be the time constraints or whatever. When I write, I always write to the artist.
Okay.
I always have the artist in mind for the story. So when I'm developing the plot and the theme of the story, like you said, it's inextricable. The artist is crucial. I've sat on scripts for years waiting for the right artist. A perfect example of this is a book I did called Hope. Yep. It's about a woman who's she's a wife, she's a mother. She also moonlights as a superhero. And within the first 5 pages of the first issue, not to give away too much, but she's in a car accident with her family. And she has to reveal her secret identity to protect her daughter and save her daughter's life from this accident. It then comes out that she's an unregistered superhero, and her whole life dissolves from there. And I tell people, Hope is the scariest book I've ever written. There's no monsters in it, but it's terrifying. And people thought I was joking until they read the first issue. They're like, "Oh my God, you're not kidding." I bring up Hope as an example because I auditioned more artists for the first volume for the book that became Hope Volume 1 than anything else I've ever done.
Okay.
Because I could never find exactly the right person, exactly right collaborator. And when I did, with Kaylin Smith, she writes her own stuff as well. She contributed some great ideas to the formation of the story, and her art style was perfect. I say this, that all art's subjective. Different people like different art and things like that. To me, Kaylin was the perfect artist to launch that series.
Love it. Love it.
And it's like that with everything. When I do Tales of Mystery volumes, I've talked to some artists before and I said, look, the next volume, I'm having someone else draw this one. It's not that you're not phenomenal. You are. And we will circle back to the next one. But this one, I need a certain style of artist to tell this story. Right. And that's that even with Nightmare World, there's 52 stories in the whole series. There's some scripts that I knew the story. I did not write the script. So I kind of misspoke earlier. I said I'd sit on scripts for years. Sometimes I'd sit on scripts for years. Sometimes I would not write the script until I had the artist, because it's much like making music, right? You play to your collaborators.
Yep.
You structured around that. And that's very crucial in this process to me. If I were doing corporate comics, if I was writing Spider-Man or Batman or whatever, I would turn in a script, they would assign an artist, and it would go. And that's fine. A lot of comics are made that way every month. I approach this as a true, even if it's temporary, union, that you are the right person for this job. I'm going to cater this to you. And together, we're going to make something that we can be especially proud of. And if we never work together again, so be it. If we work together 100 times, so be it. But at that moment, this is the right person for that book. And I think that's why a lot of the stuff I've written, I got a whole spinner rack full of my own graphic novels, not just comics, graphic novels. The reason these continue to sell, continue to do well, continue to resonate is because I think people feel that connection. I'm going to drop one more name, James O'Barr, who did The Crow. A lot of people know the movie.
Sure.
The Crow.
Sure.
He wrote and drew The Crow, and the art is so visceral in that book and so powerful. And I'm going to do a cheap plug here. Yeah. So when I did, this is a Kickstarter edition of the hardcover of Tales of Mystery, and I got to have Jim O'Barr do the cover, because The Crow was so influential on my work and so influential on this character.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, so he was the guy I wanted for the cover when I did an omnibus. Each individual volume has a cover, but when you put together volume 1 or act 1, he was the guy.
You've impacted the way the industry works in some ways, related to circulation and distribution. And I know you could probably talk about this for an hour or so, at least.
Easily.
I wonder if you could just briefly tell us about that, how you got so involved, because I think it could be helpful for people in literary fiction as well, like how you basically entered and started working the system and making it more organic or more fitting to what you wanted to accomplish.
Yeah, totally. The highlights would be this. Right around 2003, I started self-publishing my first series, Nightmare World, online. And Nightmare World is comprised, I think I mentioned earlier, of 8-page stories. So again, talking about, form and format and collaboration, working with artists on an 8-page story. Yeah, right. Old school, man. They're the original self-published first, or not self-published, but small publisher, the first issue. You don't see those around anymore. So you must have had a hookup back in the day, my friend.
Yeah, man.
But what I would do is, working with artists, when I was getting started, right, I didn't have the funds necessarily or the name value or the name brand to work with artists on big, long stories. And going back again, the first thing we talked about, my influences, the short story writers. it is infinitely more difficult to write a good short story than write a long story. Anybody that writes, I think, can tell you that writing, doing a comic story in and out, 8 pages, 5 panels per page. I have to tell a full story in 40 pictures. Okay. What I did, coming back to your question, every Thursday, I would post 2 pages online. So every month, I had a new 8-page story with a different artist. And then I had to have a little course talk about craft, which we'll get into later. I'd have a little mini cliffhanger every 2 pages too, right? Every month you do a new story. I was one of the OGs of publishing comic books online, not just 8-bit panel, 8-bit 3-panel gags. Fully realized because printing was so expensive, and I wanted to own my own work, and I didn't have the pedigree yet out there to necessarily get picked up by a publisher who let me own my own stuff. And because I was creating it as we went, eventually became a 52+ story series. But that model, which I did not come up with, but I was one of the ones that helped push it, really opened the doors to a lot of things. Like now we have things like Comixology. And I've talked to people from Comixology. I've talked to people from Webtoons, and the people involved in like Webtoons have come up to me and said, Dirk, you were one of the OGs, man. You're the reason that we're here now. And that's really cool. As if that's not enough to hang your hat on, I guess. In the mid 2000s, maybe a little later, I lied. It was actually probably the early 2010s. Crowdfunding became a really big thing with Kickstarter. I was always very concerned about kickstarting a graphic novel, crowdfunding it, selling it directly to the readers, because it would cut out my relationship with retailers. Ultimately, any writer, we want our books, right? We want our books to be in bookstores and go buy it, So what I ended up doing was really cultivating this idea of how to use Kickstarter without cutting out the retailers. So what we did was when you go to a bookstore, and this is a book that's coming out next year, the Tales of Mystery Act 1 Omnibus. Again, this is one of James Lamar cover, right? If you go to a bookstore next year when this is distributed from Source Point Press, you get trade paperback edition, right? Trade paperback edition, cool. First 4 volumes of the book. Awesome. On the bookshelf, bam, there you go. If you pre-order my book on Kickstarter, you get a hardcover edition.
Wow.
Right? And then if enough people back it, we'll do gold gilded pages.
Oh,
and a ribbon bookmark.
oh wow.
Embossing.
Yeah.
And things like that. And then I'll do a little bonus comic that you can only get on Kickstarter. And then you get book plates, like this is unsigned, but signed by me and the artist, and he'll do a head sketch on it. And then James O'Barr did a little mini art print, and he signs it and I sign it. These are things that I cannot offer through the direct market. I can't offer this at the local bookstores, but I can offer to my diehards, to people that are the early adapters to the work. So the early adapters get the big fancy version. The people that read my work make it possible to offer more work. And really what it comes down to is find your tribe.
Good.
Right? Tales of Mystery is not going to be it for everybody. Nightmare World's not going to be for everybody. I don't write for everybody. I write for people that like theme-based, emotionally invested horror. There's plenty of good stuff out there I'll never get a chance to read. Right? But I want to find the people. I want to let people know, be aware of the stuff that I offer, so that when you're looking for good, emotionally investing horror, told in pictures, right? That I'm your guy. Dirk Manning's your guy. I got you. Check that guy out.
Nice. Dirk Manning, thank you so much for being here, taking the time to come to Pros from the Underground. I hope you'll come back and we'll get even further into some craft and industry stuff.
You heard it here, friends. The door is open, so I look forward to being back.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.